Welcome to the First Down Football Show. I am your host, Andrew Gradinskis. And with that, the 2026 NFL Draft is in the books. Today, we're going to be looking at each team's draft haul, and we're going to be giving a grade. Some interesting draft classes throughout. Very interesting picks that we get the chance to talk about. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So, we're going to be doing this in alphabetical order. So, we're going to start with the Arizona Cardinals, and then to the Falcons, and so on. So, as a disclaimer, I think grading draft classes based on what you think the players are going to be is a little bit of a null point. I think it's really hard to project what these players' career is going to look like, and a lot of time you're wrong. So this is purely a grading on kind of where they took these players, where they were expected to go. Were they really good value picks? Were they more reaches? Um, that sort of thing, more than, I don't think this player is going to perform well in the NFL. So just a little bit of a disclaimer. And then as terms of like the grading system, A is like you've really killed the draft. I think I only have 5 or 6 grades that are in the A range. And then like B minus is average, C is a little bit below average, and D is pretty disappointing. So we'll get here started with the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, at pick 3, they bring in Jeremiah Love, the running back from Notre Dame. It's a little bit questionable of a pick. I think there was better value on the board, and new coaching staff, new regime there, and you start it with a running back. I think, don't get me wrong, Love is absolutely electric, but there could have been some other picks. But I don't hate the pick as much as some other people. If you truly believe that he was the best player on the board and for years to come, that he's going to be the best player in the class, you take him at 3. So I don't mind that. I think Basantis is fairly good value. I was a little bit lower on Basantis uh, than a lot of other people may be. I think he does have a penalty problem. He had 8 holds last year, so that's a little bit of a concern. But at 34, I don't really have a problem with it. I thought he could have snuck into the end of the first round, especially with the run on offensive linemen in the first round. Carson Beck was a very interesting pick. I think when the Niners went, or when the Cardinals went Beck, I was expecting Nussmeier to be that third quarterback off the board, but I could see why it was Beck. Obviously going before Aller and Nussmeier. It's an interesting fit. He's kind of a different quarterback than the quarterbacks that Matt LaFleur are used to working with. So it'll be interesting to see when he gets on the field there, if he gets on the field, and how he performs. Caleb Proctor's a guy who I really like, small school guy from southeastern Louisiana. He's a guy that can play 5 tech, but also move inside. He's a little bit bigger. He's about 290 pounds, so it's going to be hard for him to come off the edge. But at that 3 tech, I think that's a perfect spot for him in this defense. Reggie Virgil is a guy that I like from Texas Tech. Good value in the 5th round. And then Carson Sherrar and Jaden Williams, they're late round picks. Not guaranteed to make the roster, but not going to move the needle at all. So for the Arizona Cardinals, I have a C plus. I think overall it was a good class. Probably pretty average, but they did get some guys that will help this team rebuild and move forward. All right, the Atlanta Falcons. Obviously it's difficult to have a great draft when you don't have a first round pick, but I think the value they got was really great. Avion Terrell, halfway through the 2nd round, is really good value. I thought he was a guy that was going to go at the end of the 1st round, early second. I did not expect him to be there at that pick. Zachariah Branch, I think, is a weapon for this offense that they can use. He's kind of a different change of pace for a receiver that Atlanta has next to Drake London, so I like that value and the fit for Atlanta. Kendall Daniels is a guy who I think was underrated throughout the draft process, but overall a guy that could come in and be an impact guy on day one. And then one other pick that I want to point out is Harold Perkins. I really like Harold Perkins. It's just gonna be challenging. Where do you play him? And he's got to develop. Where he plays. I think he's a guy with a lot of upside. His freshman year at LSU, he looked like a bona fide top 10 pick. And they moved around the defense a couple times, and it's really tough when you're constantly moving and you're kind of in that tweener role to develop as a player. So I hope he ends up panning out well for the Falcons, and I still have a lot of hope in Harold Perkins. So in the sixth round, I think you get a guy who's really high upside. Overall, a very solid class for a team that doesn't have a first round pick. So I'm giving the Atlanta Falcons a B. All right, next, the Baltimore Ravens. They have a lot of picks here. They started out their draft with Vega Ioane and Zion Young, I think was the perfect pairing for the Baltimore Ravens. You grab a guard, someone who is a great pass protector too, which is huge for that offense, especially with their need at center. Maybe their approach was we're going to grab a great pass protecting guard to take the load off of underdeveloped center. Zion Young, I think, is a guy that I wasn't expecting to go first round, but I thought could sneak into the first round. Jacoby Lane, I think this was a little bit early for him, and I'm surprised the Ravens did not go center. So that was a little bit of a surprise pick. They did not address their center need. Instead, they went back-to-back receivers. I think Elijah Surratt, this is really good value for Surratt. Fourth round guy. Not a guy who has a lot of physical traits. He's not a burner, and he's not super athletic, but somehow he always finds a way to get open. Great back shoulder receiver. So I like Surratt here to the Ravens. I think it gives the Ravens a type of receiver they have not had in a long time. Then they trade up for Matthew Hibner, who tight end from SMU. Not a lot of production at SMU. Kind of undersized tight end as well, and not a great blocker. But he is an athletic tight end that is going to be kind of that secondary tight end to Mark Andrews, similar to Isaiah Likely. I think the pairing of Hibner and Cuevas is going to be the production that you saw from Likely last year. He's kind of like those two guys are kind of the best sides of Likely. You get the blocking, you get the primarily athletic catching tight ends. So those two production together will be kind of similar to the way that Likely was in that offense. Chandler Rivers in the fifth round, I think, is a steal. He's a guy that could have went day two. Projects to be a slot corner. He's 5'9", so that's probably why he slid to day three here. But I think it was tremendous value grabbing Rivers in the fifth round. Adam Randall, I question that pick a little bit because Katron Allen was on the board, and I was higher on Allen than I was on Randall. He's a wide receiver move to running back and just needs time to develop, but he is a athletic freak, and he's 6'3", 220. Who else is 6'3", 220? Derrick Henry. So I'm not saying he's that type of player, but being in the same backfield as him can learn a little bit from the king. Ryan Eckley, punter, first punter off the board. Doesn't really move the needle for me. And then Rayshon Benny, the last guy I'll talk about here, he is a guy that I thought could have went in the fourth or fifth round. 1 year starter at Michigan, but that was just because he was behind Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. So Benny is a guy that I really like, and I think can be a really good depth piece for the Ravens, but also develop into, a starter. And that's something that when you get that type of value in the seventh round, that really is what you're looking for, and it's just an added bonus. So I'm giving the Ravens a B plus. I think, because they had a lot of picks, it's a little bit easier to get a higher grade. There were some questionable moves, but overall, I like the draft haul for the Baltimore Ravens. Buffalo Bills. They trade out of the first round twice and select TJ Parker, the edge rusher from Clemson, who had a great Senior Bowl and a great draft process as well. Obviously, the Clemson guys kind of slid a little bit because Clemson had a disappointing year. And when you have a disappointing season, it's going to hurt your production a lot and how teams view you. But I think TJ Parker addressing edge is something the Buffalo Bills absolutely needed to do. I don't think that Bradley Chubb, is your answer to that opposing edge rusher to Rousseau. So I really like that they decided to address edge early in the draft. Parker is a guy that, can develop into someone who is a multi-digit sack guy season. So I really like that. Davison Igbinosun, I'm not super high on him. He had a penalty issue 2 years ago. Kind of cleaned it up this last year. He's a physical corner, and the Bills like that style of corner. And they have a really good corner trio now, young corner trio with Benford, Maxwell, and now Ibn. Jude Bowery in the fourth, I think is a little bit early for him. I mean, I don't mind on day three reaching on a guy that you like. Bowery is a guy who can develop into a starter. He's not going to be that right away. Skylar Bell, the receiver from UConn, I think is really great value in the fourth round. He's a guy that I had a third round grade on, and I could have seen him going as early as day two. And I think he'll be very productive for the Buffalo Bills, and I think it's great value in the fourth round. Elam's Orr, I really like the Elam's Orr. He was one of my guys, but he was, I projected him more as a fifth round guy, and I think overall the consensus had him more sixth or seventh round. But he can come in and be an instant impact on special teams, and develop into a starter for the Bills. Kilgore is solid, and then I really like Zane Durant. I think he will be impact guy for the Bills. I think I'm higher on Zane Durant than a lot of people. He is undersized at the defensive tackle position. He's only 290 pounds, but I think that he can be a guy that is not only a run stuffer, but also can get pass pressure, in the pass game. So I like him, and they round out their draft with Toriano Pride, a guy who ran really fast at the combine, Tommy Doman, Florida punter, and Armaj Reed Adams, guard from that Texas A&M O-line. I am giving the Buffalo Bills a B for their draft class. Carolina Panthers. I think the Carolina Panthers were one of the biggest winners in this year's draft. I think they just continued to draft the best player available, consistently. They started off with Monroe Freeling, who I understand why you make that selection. I was really surprised they did not go Makai Lemon or Dylan Dieneman, who was still on the board. Those are both positions of need. But Monroe Freeling, is a guy that doesn't have to start day one, and I think that's probably for the best. You have Rasheed Walker there, who you brought in a 1 year rental. Monroe Freeling can be the guy that develops behind him. He's super athletic, but needs a little bit of technical work and development. But nonetheless, Taylor Moton's not getting any younger, so if when Ikem Ekwonu gets healthy and Freeling can move to the right side or vice versa, you have a really good tackle duo there for years to come. Lee Hunter at 49 is a great value pick. He's a guy that if they took at 19, I would not be upset about it. I think Lee Hunter, he was my defensive tackle one in this class. So really great value getting him in the second round. Had a great Senior Bowl and really is the run stuffer that the Carolina Panthers need next to Derek Brown. Chris Brazzell is in the third round is great value. He kind of, adds to that receiving core. Leggett hasn't worked out the way that you hoped he did when you drafted him in the first round a couple of years ago. You drafted T-Mac. This is a nice running partner next to T-Mac there. Brazzell is a field stretcher. He's 6'5" and runs sub 4.4. Like, he's going to be a great big body receiver for Bryce Young and add something to this offense that they need. And that's a, really solid wide receiver too. Will Lee in the fourth round, I think, is really great value. I mean, I expected him to go in the fourth round, and they need a corner. He's a guy that can, he's a guy who can make an impact on that defense year one. Sam Hecht in the fifth round. I was surprised he got there. I was expecting him to go third round. Did not expect him at all to get out of the fourth round. But it's great value there, and I think he's a guy that can be a starting center in this league for many years to come. So in the fifth round, Hecht's a steal. Zakee Wheatley, another guy that can be an impact on that defense. I like Wheatley coming out of Penn State. Overall, I give the Panthers an A. I think they killed this class. Some notable undrafted free agents they got. They brought in Haynes King as a guy that I liked coming out of Georgia Tech. He was my 10th ranked quarterback in this class. Not saying he's going to come in and be that guy, but he's a good backup option and gives you a little bit of change of pace at the quarterback position. So I like that addition as well. With the Chicago Bears, I think they were another team that did really solid as well, especially in the early rounds, grabbing Dylan Thieneman at 25. That is great value. I did not expect him to get past 18 with the Vikings, so grabbing Thieneman there, really good value for the Bears at a position of need. And then they go, best player available at a position of need again in the second round with Logan Jones, the center out of Iowa. This is a lot earlier than I was expecting him to go. I was expecting him to go, halfway through the third round, but they were looking at the teams that were going to be drafting before them in the third round, like the Bengals, like the Ravens, Commanders, teams that need center, and they got the top one on their board. So Logan Jones, the first center to come off the board, is going to be a plug and play starter for the Bears there. They get their guys. I think round three and day three is kind of where this draft starts to fall off a little bit. I'm not super high on Sam Roche. He has a drop problem, so it'll be interesting to see how they work around that and how they develop that in Chicago. Xavier Thomas, absolute blazer, but I was not expecting him to go day two at all. He was a guy that I thought was more fit for the fifth, sixth, or seventh round. But nonetheless, they get a lot of athleticism and speed with Xavier Thomas. Malik Muhammad is a guy that could have went day two, so I think that's great value there. Keyshawn Elliott, linebacker, he's a little bit undersized, but that's okay. And Jordan Van Den Berg, the defensive tackle from Georgia. Overall, not a bad class. Just not the great round out in end of day two and day three. So I'm giving the Chicago Bears a B minus. I think there were a few reaches, but overall, they definitely improved their team. Cincinnati Bengals, I think quietly had one of the better draft classes, this year, especially without having a first round pick, who they traded for Dexter Lawrence. So you can go ahead and throw up Dexter Lawrence on the top of that board for their draft haul with a 10th overall pick. Cassius Howell, it'll be interesting to see how he pans out in the NFL. Historically short arms, and that's kind of why he fell. One of the most productive edge rushers in this class. 11 and a half sacks last year for Cassius Howell against SEC competition. Really impressive stuff. He's just a guy that produces. And at what point do you look at the tape, and when does that override the measurements? And so I think it's good value here. You add to that edge rushing room, which is badly needed. Shamar Stewart didn't quite work out last year. Again, he's young; he has time to develop. But you bring in Boye Mafe, and those two are not going to replace the production of Trey Hendrickson. So you need another guy in that room. And Cassius Howell, I think, can be a day one instant impact for the Bengals. Takario Davis in the third round, I think, is okay value. Kind of expected him more early day three, but Connor Liu is a guy that I saw going in the second, third round, so good value there in the fourth round. Kobe Young is a guy that really athletic, big body receiver from Georgia. Fourth round's a little early for him just because he needs a lot of work technically as a receiver, but in that receiving room, I mean, if they can get the best out of Kobe Young, that would be a very scary receiving room. Already you have Higgins and Jamar Chase there. Young can be that third guy, and that would be a really hard room to guard. Brian Parker in the sixth round, I thought was really great value as well. He's listed as a center, played tackle at Duke, and can really play wherever you want him to play. You drafted Lou, so Parker probably plays more of that swing guard, but I don't think you have a problem with that. I think he can go in there and be a serviceable backup or even starter in times of need. So I like Parker there in the sixth round. I think that's really good value. And Jack Endries is another guy I think is really good value. I was looking at him more in the fifth round. He was very comparable to Eli Raridan throughout the process, and Raridan went in the third round and Endries in the seventh. So I think Andrews had a down year last year just because that Texas offense had a down year last year. But when he was with Mendoza at Cal, he was a really prolific tight end and then transferred to Texas. So I think he can be a guy that develops into that starting tight end role. And in the seventh round, that is tremendous value. And then Landon Robinson, a guy from Navy, he's kind of a tweener. Where does he fit? Does he play the three tech? Does he play edge? It'll be interesting to see where he fits if he makes the roster. But overall, really great value for the Cincinnati Bengals, especially for a team that did not have a first round pick. So I'm giving the Cincinnati Bengals a B plus. Cleveland Browns. They had a very interesting draft. I think they really maneuvered the draft board well. They traded down from 6 to 9 to get their guy, Spencer Fano. I had that mocked. I had the Browns staying put at 6 and grabbing Fano, but they add extra value there, which I think is really smart, and they did a good job of trading back and still getting their guy. Concepcion at 24, I think, is something that offers this offense something that they so desperately needed, and that's a playmaker. You look at the receiver room right now, and it's guys that have a lot of projection, but whether it's Isaiah Bond or guys like that, but not a lot of production. Jerry Judy's, an okay receiver, but he cannot be your receiver one. And so I really like the pairing Concepcion and Boston on early on day two. I think that's a really good pairing for the future. Two very different receivers, which is absolutely how you start a really successful receiver room. So I love that pairing for the Browns. I think they killed their first three picks. And then Emmanuel McNeil Warren too at the end of the second round. I mean, that is tremendous value. He's a guy that could have went in the mid 20s in the first round. So grabbing EMW here at the end of the second, again, tremendous value for the Cleveland Browns. They round out their draft with Austin Barber, the tackle from Florida, Parker Brailsford, the center from Alabama, Justin Jefferson from Alabama as well. If he develops his pass coverage game a little bit, he could be as a guy who is a starter for this team in the future. Joe Royer, tight end from Cincinnati, Taylor Green, the super athletic quarterback from Arkansas. They add to that quarterback room. And then Carson Ryan, the tight end from BYU. Overall, a really solid class for the Cleveland Browns. Some notable free agents they brought in, undrafted free agents. Logan Fano, the edge rusher from Utah, brother of Spencer Fano. And then Tyreek Sapp, the D end from Florida. I'm giving this draft class for the Cleveland Browns an A minus. I think they really killed it. They addressed positions in need, did not reach too much, and really set the foundation for a successful retool in Cleveland. Dallas Cowboys, I thought, were a team that really killed this year's draft. They trade up one spot. Some people are a little critical of that, but when you got your guy there who is going to be a day one instant impact, instant starter for your defense, like Caleb Downs will be, I don't mind giving up the extra pick to move up one spot to prevent the Dolphins or another team from selecting your guy. So I really like the pick of Caleb Downs there. Malachi Lawrence at 23 is a guy who I thought was underrated coming in. Really toolsy edge rusher. His run defense needs a lot of work, but that's not what you need him to be. You have Rashawn Gary there, and then they drafted, what's his name? Donovan Ezaraku the other year. I believe that was 2 years ago now. So you get a guy who can come in and be that instant impact pass rusher. You're going to need a lot of development, but I think Lawrence is a guy that can develop into one of the better pass rushers in the league. Jayshon Barham is a guy that I really liked. You can go back and watch our sleepers video. I had Barham, rated in the second round. I thought he was that type of player. And he's a guy that they can play off ball or rush off the edge. I think is really good value in the third round. He is not saying he's like a Parsons, but he is that type of player that you can move around the D line, drop into coverage, and he will be a successful player in that defense. He is that chess piece that teams so badly covet nowadays. Drew Shelton is a solid developmental tackle from Penn State. Devin Moore, I think, is a steal in the fourth round. That's probably where I had him valued, but I could have seen him going on day two. Really successful cornerback from Florida. LT Overton, I think this is about his range. Could have seen him going a little later as well. But the Cowboys really made it a point to address the edge rushing room because their lack of pass rush so badly so it's detrimental to that team last year. A couple notable free agents they brought in. Michael Trigg was the guy they brought in, the tight end from Baylor. He's on the older side. He's 25 years old. Not really quite sure why he dropped so far. I mean, he was a guy that I had a fourth round grade on, and I cannot believe that he went undrafted. But nonetheless, the Cowboys get a steal at tight end there. Super athletic tight end who can play more of that, in the slot role, that H-back role. Not a real true tight end one in line blocker, but a really great pickup for the Dallas Cowboys. I'm giving this draft class A minus for the Cowboys. I thought they got really good value at a lot of positions of need, um, and they did a really good job of moving around the board as well to do it. So A minus for the Dallas Cowboys. All right, the Denver Broncos. Obviously it's hard when a team doesn't have a first or second round pick, but they still did a pretty solid job. I thought they got good value at the picks they did have. I'm going to butcher this name, but Tyler Oyedem, the defensive tackle from Texas A&M, solid defensive tackle. I probably had a couple higher on my board in the third round there. But I thought Jonah Coleman was a really great value pick. He was my running back 4 in this class. Actually, could have been running back 3. I don't know. I have to go back and rewatch my rankings. But he was right there with Mike Washington. And going in the fourth round for Coleman, I think is really good value. I mean, he's a guy who had one career college fumble at Washington, and he's going to compete for that starting job in Denver. And don't be surprised if he gets it. Coleman's a guy who, not a super home run hitting running back, but he can be that early down running back for this offense, that bruising type running back, the dependable type of running back that Denver really needs. Cage Casey, tackle, probably projects more to guard in the NFL, but, will be a swing offensive lineman for that Broncos O line. Justin Jolie, really good value in the fifth round. Athletic tight end, kind of resembles the type of tight end that Evan Ingram was or is, and who they brought in for that Denver offense. Miles Scott, the safety from Illinois. Dallin Bentley, tight end from Utah. He's going to be 25, so, and really was only productive this past year at Utah. So that's probably what caused him to fall. Was he only productive because he was older than everyone? And this is why he caused him to fall. But I thought he could have went fifth round, honestly. So I think it was good value. And then Red Murdoch, the guy from Buffalo, the linebacker, really great value in the seventh round as well. Overall, for the Denver Broncos, I have a B minus grade for them. Another player that they brought in was Torian York, linebacker from A&M. So I thought they got good value. I'm giving it a B minus because I think it was average. You just look at rounds 3 through 7. I mean, they made some moves, so it's difficult to harp on a team for trading their first 2 picks when you bring in Jalen Waddle. So uh, overall, I think the draft haul was solid. They didn't reach on anyone necessarily, and they got really good value, especially on day 3, giving the Denver Broncos a B minus. The Detroit Lions, I thought, had a really good draft haul. Started with Blake Miller in the first round, who's going to be a plug and play tackle for that offense. Derek Moore, a running mate with Aiden Hutchinson, another Michigan to Detroit connection there. Jimmy Rolder, I thought this was a little early for him, but really physical linebacker. Keith Abney in the fifth round is an absolute steal. I could not believe that he made it to day 3, let alone past the fourth round. So Abney was an absolute steal there. He's going to be plug and play slot corner for that defense. Kendrick Law, good value in the fifth. Skylar Gill-Howard, a guy that I was high on. I think this was his range though, but he can develop into a more useful defensive lineman for that defense. And then Tyree West from Tennessee. Overall, I think the Titans did a really good job of addressing the Lions did a good job of addressing positions of need while also getting really good value. Couple free agents they brought in Luke Altmaier from Illinois, the quarterback there. I think a good depth piece, a good developmental guy, and then Miles Kitselman from Tennessee, who I thought is a really solid tight end and could have been drafted. They get him, and then Anthony Lucas from USC as well, a guy that just never really put it together at USC, but under Dan Campbell and that Lions defense can develop into a pass rush specialist, a guy that can be a rotational piece for that Detroit Lions defense. B plus for the Detroit Lions. Next, we got the Green Bay Packers. Again, a team without a first round pick, but they got really good value. Brandon Cisse in the second round, a guy that they can move all over that defensive backfield. Really like that pick. Chris McClellan, a run stuffing defensive tackle. He's a one tech from Missouri, something that the Packers really need after they shipped Kenny Clark off to Dallas. Deni Dennis Sutton is a guy that I think has a lot of upside. In the fourth round, really good value. He could have went in the third round, potentially higher. When Abdul Carter was at Penn State, Deni Dennis Sutton was a guy that everyone was saying, no, watch out for. Abdul Carter is good, but watch out for Dennis Sutton because he could be even more impactful. Never really put it together at Penn State. Obviously, when they have the type of season that they did, no one played well. Um, but Dennis Sutton's a guy that can develop into a really good pass rusher in the NFL. Jaeger Burton, really solid center from Kentucky, a little older, but the Packers need a center after they let go of Elton Jenkins. So Jaeger Burton's a guy that you'd be comfortable plugging and playing him day one. I think Monty Jackson, cornerback from Alabama, solid value in the sixth round. I'm not gonna hyper analyze a sixth round pick, and then you get Trace Mack, who probably the best kicker in this year's class. So grab him in the sixth round. You had McManus last year who was inconsistent, so grabbing Smack and hoping that he can be your kicker of the future in the sixth round is worth it. Overall, I'm giving the Packers a B. Houston Texans. They had a very interesting draft class. A team that didn't have a ton of needs coming into this year's class, so it was really interesting to see what they were going to do, with two picks in the top 38 picks. So at 26, they grabbed Keelan Rutledge, the guard from Georgia Tech, guy that I was super high on. I had mocked in a couple of my first round drafts. I think Rutledge, you don't see a lot of flaws with his game. A guy that is a guard, but also has played center before. So maybe that's their plan for the Houston Texans to play him at center. I know they brought in Wyatt Teller at guard this year, so the guard position is kind of shored up. Obviously, some inconsistencies there, but Rutledge could be that center or guard. But he's going to play and start year one. I expect him to be a really good guard for that offense. Then the Houston Texans in the second round jump the New York Giants to select Caden McDonald, the next defensive interior for that stout Texans defensive line. I think he's the perfect complement to that defensive line. You look at Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter and what they are able to do. They still have Sheldon Rankins there, but Caden McDonald is the perfect defensive tackle to put on that line. True run stuffer. You'd like to see a little bit more in the pass rush game from him, but you don't necessarily need that when you have the edge rushers that the Texans do. So Caden McDonald, great value there. Marlon Klein, I think this was a flat out reach. Could be productive tight end in the NFL, but Klein was a guy that I thought was going to go sixth round, and there he is going 57th or 59th overall. Really head scratching considering that Max Clare was still on the board, who I had as the second best tight end in this class behind Kenyon Sadiq. So that was very interesting to see the Texans go with Klein this early. And then the pick before was Borkorcher as well. So two tight ends selected right before Max Clare. So that was interesting. I thought it was definitely a reach, but um, we'll see how he pans out. They get Nawawu from Oklahoma. I'm not super high on him. I kind of had a fifth round grade on him. Again, a little bit of reach, but not too bad. Wade Woodaz, I honestly did not expect him to get drafted, but he was a fourth rounder. So, very interesting selection. I thought he was more of a special teams impact guy, but in the fourth round, you're not really drafting for special teams. You're drafting for guys that can be depth pieces and have developed into starters. So Woodaz is an interesting pick there. Kamari Ramsey, another interesting pick, the safety from USC. Lewis Bond is a guy that I think could develop and be a good slot receiver in the NFL. Um, just that Boston College team was not very good. So I heard his draft stock a little bit, but I think he was one of the bright spots on that team though this last year. Aiden Fisher in the seventh round is good value though. I think he is a guy that could potentially be a starter for this Texans defense. Really smart player. Was the anchor for that Indiana defense that was so good last year. Overall, I give the Houston Texans a C plus. Just an average draft. I really liked their first two picks. They were very interesting and fun, and I thought, those two players are going to be really good in the NFL, but the rest of the draft really fell off. Um, and it kind of started with that Marlon Klein pick. So overall, C plus for the Houston Texans. The Indianapolis Colts are up next, and they're a team that I thought had a really, really good draft, especially considering that they didn't have a first round pick. CJ Allen at 53 is great value. I think a lot of people probably thought that he was the next linebacker off the board after Sonny Styles. I had a couple people higher than Allen, but I thought this is really good value for him. He could have been a guy that goes, early 40s, early second round. So Allen at 53, great value for the Colts, who need a linebacker as well. AJ Halsey is a guy that I was expecting to go second round, so Halsey's good value as well. Jalen Farmer, another one of my guys that, if you go back and watch that sleepers video, um, Farmer is a guy that I had a day 2 grade on. He ends up going day 3 here to the Colts. Bryce Betcher, I thought I had a third round grade on Betcher, linebacker from Oregon. He goes in the fourth, again, really good value. George Gums, the edge rusher from Florida. Pick that I want to highlight. I think they ended the draft extremely well. Caden Curry, the edge rusher from Ohio State. His measurements just didn't measure well, but for a guy on that defensive line for Ohio State, I mean, he produced and he made an impact for that Ohio State defense. Really great value here in the sixth round for Caden Curry. I think, he's just one of those guys that are a dog, and you really value that late in rounds, but he can also be a guy that produces for the Colts. So grabbing that in the sixth round, really good value. Seth McGowan, the running back from Kentucky, not super athletic, has a little bit of a fumbling problem, but McGowan is a guy, I think this is adequate value there. And then Deion Burks, I was surprised that he was there at 254. Like, really surprised. Almost went undrafted. It's probably the size concern. He measured in at 5'9", very, very slender build, but an absolute blazer. Great after the catch. And he kind of is that similar player to Josh Downs. So, grabbing Deion Burks and letting him develop a little bit, I think gives you that 1-2 punch. If you want to put Downs on the outside now, and you gave Alec Pierce all that money, Deion Burks can be a really nice compliment for that wide receiver room. Grabbing him in the seventh round is a steal. So overall, I give the Indianapolis Colts a B plus. A team that didn't have a first round pick, really just stuck it out and picked at all their picks and grabbed the best player available in a lot of situations. Really liked the positions they addressed, and they got some steals, I think. So B plus for the Indianapolis Colts. And now, probably the most disappointing team in the draft. I have the Jacksonville Jaguars. Really questionable draft here for the Jaguars. Nate Borkircher. I mean, you can go back and watch the tight end ranking videos. I was talking about him like, oh, like he's one of my guys. Like I'm really high on him. I think I had a fourth round grade on him, and I think a lot of people had a late day three grades on Borkircher there. They drafted him at 56, ahead of again Max Clare, who I was talking about earlier. Their tight end from Ohio State. Borkircher's is not very athletic. He is a good blocker. That's one of the things that I really liked about him, and I would be willing to take an early day three pick on. But didn't produce a lot in that A&M offense, and just didn't have the physical traits that some of these other tight ends had. So really questionable there at the end of the second round. Albert Regis was a reach again from A&M, early third round, or mid third round. I just didn't see the value there. They kind of saved their draft with Emmanuel Pregnon, who I wouldn't have been shocked if he went first round. I was expecting to hear his name called halfway through the second round. They grab him at the end of the third round, so at least they get good value there. He's a guy that they can plug and play on the offensive line. And they round out their draft with Jalen Husky, Wesley Williams, Tanner Koziel, Josh Cameron, who's a guy that I think can be a productive NFL wide receiver. He's built like a running back, but he can be a guy that is a productive NFL receiver. And then C.J. Williams, Zach Dufree, Parker Hughes. Really disappointing draft for the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that really didn't do anything in free agency as well. So really, really questionable. I think honestly the best part of their draft was their undrafted free agents. They brought in a lot of them and some notable names. Joey Aguilar, the quarterback from Tennessee, Jamar E. Taylor, a guy who, Virginia really relied on, especially down the end of the season. But he was a guy that, really was a fighter for that offense and was a productive and consistent running back for that team. So I expect Taylor to make the roster, and I expect him to be a contributing factor to that Jaguars offense next year. So I like that. They brought in a lot of receivers as well. Probably most notably Trevor Pena, receiver from Penn State. And then a couple other guys that they brought in I like. Devon Marshall, the cornerback from NC State, I thought would probably go fourth or fifth round. Ends up going undrafted. They bring him in, and then Devin Neal. Overall, I think that it's pretty sad when I'm getting more excited about their undrafted free agents than their actual draft class. Really disappointing draft from the Jacksonville Jaguars, giving it a D. Kansas City Chiefs, I thought were a team that really did well. Obviously had a lot of picks, especially early in the draft, but they addressed positions of need, and they didn't reach on anyone as well, and they got really good value. Mansour Lane, I don't think they needed to trade up for him, but um, good value. You send a third round pick to hop the Commanders, who who were going to take Sonny Styles anyway, so didn't see the need for that. But I guess you got to go and secure the best corner in the class if the next one comes off the board. What was it? Third. What was it? 22 picks later, Chris Johnson to the Dolphins, I think was it. So you grab Delane. Makes sense. They needed a corner, especially after this offseason. Peter Woods, the defensive tackle from Clemson. The most concerning thing about his game is that every year in college, he's been less and less productive. His first year as a starter at Clemson, it looked like he was going to be a top 10 pick. Goes at the end of the first round here. But if there's a team that's going to extract that talent out of him, it's going to be the Kansas City Chiefs. He can be that Chris Jones replacement. Mason Thomas, I think, is good value at 40. He's a guy that could have went at the back end of the first round. I believe I had him mocked 31 to the Patriots in my final mock. So good value there for the Chiefs. Jadon Kennedy, the corner from Oregon, physical corner, and was a big part of that defense as well. So good value in the fourth. I think that's about where I had him. Emmett Johnson in the fifth was really good value. I think Emmett Johnson was very underrated throughout this draft cycle, probably because he ran the slowest 40 out of all running backs. So that's kind of what held him back. Um, but really productive runner at Nebraska. I mean, you look at his production and compare it to the rest of the FBS. I mean, he was third leading rusher in the country. So I believe it was that, something around there. But Emmett Johnson, was a really good back for Nebraska and will be a nice 1-2 punch for the Chiefs with Kenneth Walker there. Cyrus Allen, a guy who's, the size speed guy for the Chiefs. And then you round out your draft class with Garrett Nussmeier, who, I mean, there had to be something extremely wrong with his medicals because, I mean, he was a guy who was going to go first round at this point last year. Obviously, didn't have a great season, was injured, but there had to be something wrong with the medicals because there is no way that he was getting out of day two, especially with Aller and Beck drafted on day two. Um, which really sucks for him because I had him rated as third best quarterback in this class, and he was on the verge of going undrafted, but he gets to be in a good situation, can develop a little bit. I'm still high on Nussmeier. I think he can be a solid quarterback in the NFL. For the Chiefs, I am giving them a B plus. I think overall they had a really solid draft. Didn't really reach on anyone, which is good, and got good value as well down the board. Taking a look at their undrafted free agents, probably most notably Jaden Ott, the running back from Oklahoma. Most notably, he was with Cal. He's dealt with some injuries and crowded backfields, but really electric player at Cal. So I hope that he can develop and get back to the Jaden Ott we saw there. And then Vincent Anthony Jr., the edge rusher from Duke, I think has some upside. So I like their draft class and a couple of their free agents. So overall, B plus for the Kansas City Chiefs. Las Vegas Raiders, I thought, absolutely crushed this year's draft. Obviously, first overall pick, Fernando Mendoza. We've known it since January. Um, don't want to talk too much about that. I think we've covered it to a pretty full extent over the last couple of months. Trading Stukes, though, one of the guys that was one of my guys. I thought he could go second round, and then Daniel Jeremiah drops that mock draft, and he's going 29 in the Chiefs. And so getting that first round buzz. So I expected him to go early second round. Stukes, he is that nickel corner safety hybrid that teams have really been looking for in their defenses. And Stukes is a guy that will come in and be that nickel corner for the Las Vegas Raiders. So I like the value there. Super athletic. That's kind of you know, the kind of theme with their draft class. I mean, you look at their players, Kieran Crawford, early third round, maybe a little bit of a reach, but a guy who is really young and is still developing as a pass rusher. But I really like Kieran Crawford. I think he can develop into a really consistent pass rusher. He was more productive than Keldrick Falk was last year. So I like Crawford. Trey Zune, the center. Obviously, they brought in Linderbaum. Zune played left tackle at A&M this past year, but he projects more to guard, a little bit on the smaller side. He projects more to center, I guess. But with Linderbaum there, he'll probably play that swing guard, which is okay. Drafting in the third round. I think there was a couple other guards that I would have been higher on than Zune / centers. But Jermon McCoy in the fourth round. I mean, you want to talk about something seriously wrong with the medicals. I mean, Jermon McCoy is really takes a fall after the whole bone plug incident. And, does he ever play football again? He said he feels good. He looked good at his pro day. I hope he stays healthy. I hope he really is able to produce in the NFL. They trade up one spot and secure Jermon McCoy at the beginning of day three. And I mean, if he wasn't injured, he would be a top 10 pick in this class. He would have been the first corner off the board. Um, Unfortunate that he slides to the fourth round here. But if he is healthy, the Raiders get an absolute steal with Jermon McCoy in the fourth round. Mike Washington, another guy who was an absolute steal. Like, I fully expected him to go on day two, especially after the combine he had. Um, you'd like to see some bigger plays on film from Washington, but Arkansas wasn't a great team, and so their O line suffered because of that, and Washington suffered because the O line was bad. So um, he's a good one-two punch with Genty there. I think it's a really good fit. Dalton Johnson, the safety from Arizona, I thought could have went higher, really good value. Hezekiah Masses, a corner from California, I thought he could have went honestly at the end of day two. He goes here in the fifth round, good value. And then they round out their class with Malik Benson, who um, was a good receiver for Oregon this past season. And then Brandon Cleveland, defensive tackle from NC State. Uh, Couple notable guys they brought in for undrafted free agents. Roman Hemby, the running back from Indiana. That 1-2 punch with Kalen Black. Hemby being more of the pass catching back. So I really like that fit as well. Dylan Lobby probably gets cut just because of the amount of running backs they brought in, and Hemby kind of fills that role. Xavier Sorey Jr., the linebacker from Arkansas, I think can be a productive special teamer for the Raiders, so I really like them bringing in Sorey there. But overall for the Raiders, I have an A. One of the two A's I have in this class. I think they absolutely killed it. They got good value, didn't reach too much, and had a really good draft class. Got a lot better. Los Angeles Chargers, I thought they did a really good job of getting some value as well as kind of letting the board fall to them. They get Akeem Mesidor at pick 22. Edge rusher wasn't their biggest need, but they get a guy that, can be productive right away and will have to be productive right away because he's on the older side. But Khalil Mack is not getting any younger, so planning for the future, grabbing Mesidor, smart. Jake Slaughter in the second round was a little bit surprising, but the Chargers have a need at center, and so they grab their guy in the second round. Plug and play center. Really good center, really great at pass protection as well as run blocking. I think Slaughter will be the focal point of that interior offensive line for the Chargers, and that's what they need. I mean, that's what killed them last year. Brennan Thompson, a guy who's a speedster. He ran a 4.26 40 at the combine. Really interested to see how they're going to use him with that Mike McDaniel offense now. Travis Burke, a developmental tackle from Memphis, comes in at like 6'9", over 320 pounds. So not a guy that you have to start right away, but because you have Alt and Slater, but a guy that can develop and play. And the Harbaughs like those big offensive linemen, so I like Burke. Jennison Smith, I thought he could have went earlier than this. Nick Barrett from South Carolina, good value there. Logan Taylor, and then Alex Harkey, the sixth round, is good value as well. So they shore up that offensive line and the pass rush. I thought they had a really productive draft. And then some players that they brought in, the Dame Tucker, edge rusher from Western Michigan, who could have went fifth round, honestly. The age thing is a concern. I mean, he's 25 years old, so if he makes the roster, he can be a guy that contributes. Lander Barton, the linebacker from Utah, surprised to see him go undrafted. And then a player that I was really surprised to see go undrafted was Isaiah World, the tackle from Oregon. Originally started his career at Nevada, then transferred to Oregon. Needs a lot of work and development, but I thought a team would take a flyer on him just because of his size. So overall, I'm giving the Chargers a B plus. I wish they addressed a little bit more need early in the draft, but I think Akeem Mesidor is a solid pick for the Chargers and will be productive. I'm a Mesidor guy personally, so uh, I like the Chargers draft haul B plus. Right, the LA Rams. a little bit of a disappointment. With Makai Lemon right there at 13, I thought they were going to go all in on this season. They're so close to getting over the hump and winning another Super Bowl for Stafford. I get he's not getting any younger. Ty Simpson at 13, I was really shocked to hear that. Really shocked to hear his name go off the board there at 13. But I understand why they did it. I understand the move. But really head scratching team for that's supposed to be going all in. Max Clare at the end of the second round, I thought was really good value. Add something to that tight end room that they don't have. Keegan Tross, developmental tackle. They got good play from McClendon last year, but Tross is gonna be able to sit, not have to start right away, and a good option at tackle there. CJ Daniels, a guy who was really productive at Miami, I thought could have went a lot earlier than this. He can be that wide receiver 3 for the Rams and be a productive one, guy that can line up on the outside and let Nakua work in the slot. And then Tim Keenan, just a run block eater for Alabama, goes 7th round to the Rams. I thought the Rams, although they didn't have a lot of picks, they were in a position that could have really set their team apart from the rest of the pack. And they kind of fumbled that opportunity a little bit. I'm giving the Rams a C minus. I don't hate their draft. I think a lot of people think they're the number one draft of losers, but I don't hate their draft. I think it was okay. I think the Max Clare value saves them a little bit here, and CJ Daniels as well. Ty Simpson's definitely a head scratcher, but overall, not too. If it works out, I'm not too mad about it. I think he was a guy that could have went into the first round, so it's not a crazy reach, like some of the other picks that we've seen. Miami Dolphins had a really interesting draft. I mean, they had an unreal amount of picks. 13 draft picks for the Miami Dolphins. Really hard to mess that up, I guess. But they start their draft off by trading back for Caden Proctor. One spot with the Dallas Cowboys. It's okay. I mean, if Proctor works out, there was a need at offensive lineman for Miami. The good news is that Miami currently has 2 tackles that are serviceable, so Proctor can play guard, which is where he probably will succeed at the next level. I don't hate the pick. I mean, he was going to go 4 picks later anyway. I'm not a big Proctor guy, but if he works out, he works out. Just a little bit of an unbalanced blocker, but can develop into, a serviceable guard. I think it is a reach, but someone was going to take him in the first half of the first round, so it just happens to be the Dolphins here. And they trade up for Chris Johnson, which I thought was interesting. Um, I had him at the end of the first round. I think Avion Terrell is a little bit higher on my board than Chris Johnson, so interesting that they trade up for him and select Johnson there. I think Jacob Rodriguez is good value, though, at 43. Caleb Douglas is really a head scratcher. I mean, he's a big guy who runs fast. But in the third round, I think that was a little bit of a reach. Um, Will Kasmerick from Ohio State, again, a little bit of a reach. He's higher on a lot of other tight ends than him. But I think they kind of saved their draft with a couple picks down the stretch here. Chris Bell, Kyle Lewis, Kevin Coleman, I think are good value where they got him. Most notably Chris Bell. I mean, he was my receiver 5 in this class. I had a first round grade on Chris Bell. The knee is a little concerned. I mean, he tore his ACL, but he should be fine to, um, play next year. I think he instantly becomes that wide receiver 1 in that room, though. He's the most talented receiver in that room. I think the reason why he dropped a little bit is because he had 1 year of production, really like high production at Louisville, and this was this past year where he was a senior. So I understand what made him fall, but the Dolphins just really head scratching draft for most of it. They got good value with Bell and Lewis, but overall I'm giving the Miami Dolphins a C. Next up, the Minnesota Vikings had another interesting class. I think a lot of people thought after their first round pick that they were, losers in the draft, but I don't hate the pick of Caleb Banks. The health is going to be a concern, but overall not bad. Um, I understand why people had him as their defensive tackle one in this class. Super athletic. I mean, the size is crazy. He's like a Jordan Davis light version, but and they really needed a defensive tackle as well. So it makes sense why the Vikings did that. Jake Golday, linebacker from Cincinnati, a guy that I like. He was probably my second or third linebacker in this class. I think, I mean, super athletic as well, and he's going to be a plug and play starter for that Vikings defense. The guy in the third round, they grabbed the guy with the best nickname in the draft, Dominique Orange, Big Citrus, to clog up that middle. Two defensive tackles in the first three rounds is very interesting. It's an interesting strategy. We'll see how it works out. I would not honestly be shocked if Dominique Orange ends up being a better player than Caleb Banks, which would be a very interesting development. Caleb Tiernan in the third round is a good value, especially with the run on offensive tackles that occurred on night one. Um, I was kind of expecting him to go early day two, somewhere in the second round because he was probably the next best tackle off the board. But I think that's solid value. This is kind of where he was meant to go. Jacoby Thomas, safety from Miami. Max Bredesen, I was surprised that he went this early, but good. I mean, good for him. Utility fullback. Played a lot of fullback, but also can catch passes out of the backfield. So something that is going to be interesting for the Vikings there. I was kind of targeting him for the Ravens as a Pat Ricard replacement. I thought he would go a lot later than this, but in the fifth round, you grab the only fullback in the draft, so I don't hate it. Demings is a guy another one of my guys. I really like this pick. He went one pick after my Baltimore Ravens selected Chandler Rivers. Go back, watch that Sleepers video. I do a whole breakdown on Charles Demings. It's a guy that I thought could have went in the third round. Think is really good value here. Small school guy, but just a lockdown corner. Damon Claiborne, really interesting player from Wake Forest. This past season he had fumble issues, but before that didn't have a single fumble in his career. But super electric out of the backfield, good returner. And then they ended their draft with Gavin Gerhardt, center from Cincinnati. See if they have any notable. Okay, they brought in Tristan Lay, offensive tackle from Clemson, and then Delby Lemieux, the center slash guard from Dartmouth. Interesting to see him get picked up. And then Dylan Bell, the receiver from Georgia, another guy who's kind of bigger and athletic. So overall, solid haul for their undrafted free agents. Brett Thorson as well, the punter from Georgia, who is probably my punter number one. But overall, the draft class gets a B minus. I don't hate this class for the Vikings. I think it was average. I think they, got solid value at some picks and reached on some others, but overall, solid for the Minnesota Vikings. The New England Patriots, I think, had a really solid first 2 days, and then it kind of fell off. Caleb Lomu, obviously, addressing the offensive line was a must after the Super Bowl collapse. So Caleb Lomu, I wasn't super high on him. I had a second round grade on him, but he is a left tackle. I mean, that's what he played at Utah. Be interesting to see what happens if he even sees the field this year. Morgan Moses is on that right side, and we assume that Will Campbell will be on the left side. Gabe Yakis, a guy from Illinois. I think people probably didn't know a lot about him because he comes from Illinois. But a guy that really athletic, really good at rushing the passer. Could have went earlier than this. I like Yakis there, and the Patriots needed edge really badly. And then Raritan is a guy that I liked a lot. I think I probably had more of a fourth round grade on him, but they grabbed him at the end of the day too, so no problem with that. I think they had a really solid first 2 days, and then it kind of falls off the edge a little bit. Um, but I mean, Karan Prunty in the fifth round, Demetrius Crownover, Namdi Obayazor, Baron Morton. I thought was interesting with Nussmeyer still on the board. Jam Miller, I didn't see him getting drafted, and then Quintavious Hutchins, which I think their best pick on day 3 was Quintavious Hutchins at 247. So, I'm not going to get too worked up over day 3, just kind of how it went. But overall, for the Patriots, I have a B. You know, I think they started out pretty well. They got guys that are going to come in and be day 1 impacts. So, don't hate that draft at all for the Patriots. All right, New Orleans Saints. They had a pretty good draft haul. Jordan Tyson at 8. If he can stay healthy, I mean, this is going to be one of the better picks in the entire draft. Kristen Miller, a guy who I really liked going at 42 to New Orleans. Makes a lot of sense for that defense, and I really like that fit. Oscar Delp in the 3rd round. It'll be interesting to see how they use him. He played a lot of that H-back role at Georgia. Wasn't really used correctly at Georgia, and they always just kind of had crowded tight end rooms, so Kellen Moore, it'll be interesting to see how he uses him at the tight end role. I mean, if it's a team that's had Taysom Hill, I'm not saying they're going to use him as Taysom Hill, but, when they moved him to tight end, similar build to Oscar Delp, similar to speed to Oscar Delp, could that utilization look similar as well? Jeremiah Wright, a guy that I like a lot from Auburn, needs to develop a little bit, but can be a starter at guard. Bryce Lance, small school guy, brother of Trey Lance, but I really thought was going to go on day 2 because of his size and speed and athleticism. Good value there. Lorenzo Styles, brother of Sonny Styles, safety from Ohio State, goes in the 5th round. I mean, he amazing combine, absolute athletic freak. Don't love the pick there in the 5th round. I think he's more of a later round guy. Potentially undrafted free agent, but you get an athlete in the secondary there. You can move him around a little bit. Barian Brown, the receiver from LSU, and then TJ Hall, the corner from Iowa. Overall, not bad at all for the Saints. I think they killed their first couple rounds. I really like the selections they made. So I am giving the New Orleans Saints a B+. I think they really did a good job in the first 4 rounds addressing positions of need, but also getting really good value. New York Giants, let me get there. New York Giants, I thought, had a good draft as well. I mean, I really just want to focus on their first 3 rounds here, their first 4 picks. Arvell Reese, who could be the best player in this draft at 5. It'll be interesting to see how they use him because they have a very crowded edge rushing room. Now with Burns, Thibodeau, Abdul Carter, and Reese, I think they'll probably use him more at off ball, at least at the beginning of his career. He is very light still as an edge rusher, but his play strength is so good. So it'll be interesting to see. And the interesting conversation too is if they play him at off ball, what made them decide to go with Reese over Styles? I think that's interesting as well. So Arvell Reese at 5, I like the value there. I mean, he could be, he could have went number 2, so grabbing him at 5 is good. Francis Maui Noah at 10, he's going to slide into guard there with Illuminor at tackle. You shore up the offensive line. I think Caleb Downs would have been a great pick there for the Giants at 10, but they decided to go offensive line and shore that guard position up. Colton Hood early in the 2nd round, really good value there. He was a guy that could have went 1st round. Really held down that defensive secondary for Tennessee in the absence of Jermon McCoy. So Hood goes at 37 in the Giants. I like that pick. And Malachi Fields, I mean, he is a great wide receiver to Neighbors. I mean, 6'4", has the athleticism, jump ball receiver, kind of gives you that 1-2 punch with Neighbors there. They needed to walk away with another receiver in this class, and they do in the 3rd round. Then one other pick that I want to look at is J.C. Davis, the tackle from Illinois. I thought he could have went 4th round, and they end up getting him in the 6th. So developmental tackle who can play swing tackle for them in the future. I like the Giants draft haul. They get an A-. The New York Jets, the other team in New York. I thought they had a very solid draft. I don't think it was anything crazy, especially considering where they were picking. At 2, they went David Bailey. I don't think that was the wrong pick necessarily. I don't know if there was a wrong pick. I personally would have went Arvell Reese. I think the upside was better with Reese, but Bailey, I think, is solid as well. Um, it's just a draft class that's a little bit weaker at the top than it normally is. So they grabbed Bailey here at 2. Kenyon Sadiq, I think, was definitely an interesting pick because that tight end room is already so crowded, with a lot of draft capital invested in it as well. I mean, you drafted Mason Taylor last year with a second round pick and Jeremy Ruckert with a third round pick 2 or 3 years ago now. And then Omar Cooper at 30 was interesting. I really like that pick. That's good value. I'm really happy he went first round. I thought he could have went at 16 to the Jets and it would have been fine. Honestly, think if you switched Omar Cooper and Kenyon Sadiq, I'd be happier with that. Omar Cooper at 16, Sadiq at 30. I think I would be happier with that outcome. Lemon was on the board at 16 as well, which I thought was interesting. Pons at 50 is really good value. I love D'Angelo Pons. He's one of my guys. Daryl Jackson Jr. clogging up that middle from Florida State. Uh, he's a guy that needs to develop as a pass rusher, but can be a run stuffer right away. I like Daryl Jackson. I think he could have went in the third round. So I like that pick. Kate Klubnik in the fourth round, who they traded up for again over Nussmeier. I don't think he's gonna be the answer at quarterback. An undersized quarterback with limited athleticism and limited arm strength. I don't see that translating, but it'll be interesting to see just depth piece at quarterback. And VJ Payne is a guy that I like a lot. I think he could have went fourth or fifth round. Safety from Kansas State, physical player. Um, I expect him to make the roster, at least be a special teamer, if not a contributor on that defense. So Jets solid draft. I think it was an average draft, so they get a B minus. All right, the Philadelphia Eagles. I thought they had a really good draft as well. They trade up for Makai Lemon, which they hop the Steelers and get their guy. AJ Brown trade impending now. Eli Stowers is a fit that I really love for this team. It was a pick that I was looking at in the second round for the Eagles, and I'm glad they did it. I think he offers something next to Goddard that they don't have. I know Goddard's a solid receiver. They haven't been able to figure out that tight end position, though. Every year it feels like Goddard's going to be gone and he ends up coming back for another year. But now with Stowers there, do they play him at tight end? Do they play him at receiver? But just get weapons for that offense, especially if A.J. Brown is going to be gone. Markel Bell, I mean, this is the Eagles' offensive lineman. He's 6'8", 6'7", something like that, and he is giant. I mean, he's over 315 pounds. Gonna need some development, but that's okay because you have two of the best tackles in the game, so he can sit and learn. He played left tackle last year, so you know can develop into the starting left tackle for the Eagles. Big player. Cole Payton, interesting pick there in the fifth round. The lefty quarterback, another North Dakota State quarterback going to Philadelphia. Micah Morris was a guy that I really liked. Go check out the Sleepers video. He was a guy that I thought, would go fifth round, or had valued in the fifth round. But the consensus was he would be seventh round pick, undrafted, but really good mover, good pass protector for Georgia, and just a big offensive lineman. So I really like Micah Morris, and I think he will thrive in that Eagles offensive line. And then I think one of the more underrated picks of the entire draft is Cole Wisniewski. Don't want to butcher it too badly, but he's a guy that wasn't invited to the combine. He had 8 interceptions last year, and will be a big piece of that Eagles defense next year. They look at their safeties now, and it's Epps and Makuba, but I don't think that really moves the needle for you. You lost Blankenship last year. You need another guy, and so I think that Wisniewski from Texas Tech can be that third safety and potentially take over the starting job as well. So I'm giving the Eagles a B plus overall. Very solid class for Philly this year, like every year. I mean, all right, the team that Philly jumped for Makai Lemon, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers. They kind of got caught off guard in the first round, but I think they were able to recover. Okay. So they walk away on night one with Max Ianichor, the offensive tackle from Arizona State. Developmental piece, though. I know not a guy that you want to start day one. So interesting selection there. Obviously, they were planning on taking Makai Lemon. Um, there was a quote that said, have you ever, like when in fantasy drafts, if you have ever auto drafted because you don't know who to select, that's what the Steelers did because they had no idea what to do, no idea where to pivot after Makai Lemon was selected. So they end up with Hiana Chore there, but they recover with Jeremy Bernard, who I think is going to be a really good piece to this Pittsburgh offense. I think it's the perfect complement to um, Pittman and Metcalf, and it gives them something that they don't currently have in those receivers. He's a guy that's good at everything, great at nothing, really. Not a great blazer, really good route runner, really good hands, but overall, a good pivot from Makai Lemon. Doesn't have any special yak like Makai Lemon, but good pick in the second round there. Drew Aller in the third round was interesting. I mean, I'm not super high on him. I get the traits, I get the natural ability, the arm strength, but he just doesn't let it rip enough. And when he does, he ends up making mistakes. So it's really concerning to see his decision making and processing be as bad as it is. So spending a third round pick on a guy that is all traits and trying to coach that into him is concerning. Dalen Everett in the third round, a little early for him. But overall, a good corner. Very handsy though. Going to draw some DPIs there. Jennings Dunker, who projects to guard. He's an AFC North player, AFC North type of player. Caden Weegan, I think it was a reach in the fourth round on a guy who's going to primarily just be a kick returner and punt returner. Um, he was not on my draft board at all. Um, but he's going to be a primarily specialist and drafted in the fourth round. I think it's questionable. And then Robert Spears Jennings, good value in the seventh, and Eli Heidenreich, I think, is really good value as well. It'll be interesting to see how they use him in that offense, and that was a really special moment in Pittsburgh. Overall, I'm giving their draft a C, though. I think they, reached a lot, and nothing that moves the needle. Like a Makai Lemon would have moved the needle, so not entirely their fault, but a little bit below average draft. And speaking of below average drafts, San Francisco 49ers are up next. I mean, Dejuan's dribbling is okay. I mean, I really like him. I really like him in the fourth round. I think he's a productive receiver. He was a productive receiver for Ole Miss last year, and he will be a productive receiver for the Niners. But with the 33rd overall pick, I was not expecting to hear Dejon Stribling's name. So interesting selection for the Niners there, to say the least. Definitely a reach in my book, especially with some of the other receivers that were on the board. Romello Height in the third round. Good value there. I think I really like that pick. Some people don't as much. Kalen Black, I think, was a little bit of a reach. I had him as a fifth rounder. Um, Physical running back, I think was going to be a good change of pace back to McCaffrey. So something they needed. His kind of comp when I watched him is a lot of Brian Robinson, who they just had there in San Francisco. So um, I think Black will be a good running back. So we'll see how his career develops, but I think nonetheless a reach. Grayson Halton and Ephesians Prysock. Even for Prysock, it's a little early. I kind of had him more in the 170 range as a fifth rounder, but Halton I think is a really good pick. He's a guy that could have went at the end of second round, honestly. A little bit undersized as a defensive tackle, but will be fine for the offense or for that defensive line. So Halton is probably the best pick in this class. Um, Carver Willis, developmental tackle, Fusion Prysock, guy that can play corner, but not going to be a starter right away. I mean, obviously it's the fourth round, but um, just lacks the elite traits of a cornerback that you'd like to see. But it was a disappointing draft for the San Francisco 49ers. I'm giving them a D for their draft class. All right, Seattle Seahawks, as we come close to the end, another below average draft class. They start out with Jadarian Price on day one. I think they could have traded back and selected him, um, especially for a team that doesn't have a lot of picks. I mean, they came into this draft with 4 picks. They were able to move back and add more, but Jadarian Price in the first round is interesting to say the least. They needed a running back, and they got one. Bud Clark in the second round was definitely a reach. I think he was more of a day 3 guy. But, I mean, in the Senior Bowl, his name was being announced all the time. He was always around the ball, always forcing something, whether it was an incompletion, turnover, or whatever. So I don't hate the pick of Bud Clark there. Just a little bit undersized. But they did have a need at safety after they lost Kobe Bryant. So they bring in Bud Clark in the second round. Julian Neal, super athletic corner from Arkansas. Don't hate it in the third round. Bo Stevens in the fifth is good value. I think Emmanuel Henderson can be an underrated pick for the Seahawks there. He can be that wide receiver 3 for that offense. I think it'll be an interesting fit. Electric player. So we'll see how he fits and if he makes the roster. And the last player I'll touch on is Devin Eastern, run stuffing defensive tackle from Minnesota. Average value there in the 7th round. It's kind of where I expected him to go. Seattle is going to get a C for a grade. All right, Tampa Bay Buccaneers are next. And I thought they had a really, really good draft. Ruben Bain falling to them at 15 is the dream. I thought they would have to trade up to get one of the top 3 edge rushers in this class. They don't. They stay put and get maybe the best edge rusher in this class. They can move him in to 3-tech on some, passing situations, but he'll be fine on the edge as well. They really desperately need some pass rush, though, and Ruben Bain is going to provide that. Josiah Trotter in the second round. I was very surprised to hear his name that early, but I think it's a really good pick. I like Josiah Trotter a lot. He went ahead of some other guys. I was expecting C.J. Allen to go ahead of Trotter, but really like that pick for the Buccaneers. Ted Hurst in the third round. Good value there. He could be one of the better receivers in this class. Keontae Scott, I think, is probably the steal of the draft outside of Ruben Bain for the Buccaneers. Good, safety slot corner, hybrid. Keontae Scott's going to come in and be that, I don't want to say Jamel Dean replacement because he was more of an outside corner cover 3, but Keontae Scott's going to be a nickel corner for the Buccaneers and kind of be a chess piece that they can move around. Capehart in the 5th round, great value, super productive defensive tackle. You're a little undersized but twitchy and just really, really productive for that Clemson defense. Everyone kind of struggled, but Capehart on day 3 is a steal. And then Billy Schroff is a guy that I thought could have went earlier, maybe 4th round, but a serviceable swing guard for Tampa, and then Bauer Sharp, the tight end from LSU, to close it out. Giving the Tampa Bay Buccaneers an A-. I thought they absolutely killed this draft. They just drafted best player available a lot of the time, and that's what happens when you do that. You end up accruing a lot of talent, and the guys that slide through the cracks, you end up picking them up. So, good draft for the Buccaneers. All right, last 2 here, the Titans. They start their draft with Carnell Tate and end day 1 with Keldrick Falk. I think Tate was a little bit of a reach, but you can't hate on the Titans for trying to surround their number 1 overall quarterback with some talent. So I don't hate that pick at all. I'd probably give that pick a B. Keldrick Falk, the edge rusher from Auburn. There's obviously a lot of controversy over Falk, but at 31, it's good value. I don't care what you think of Falk. It's good value. I mean, he's a guy that could have went in the teens, and I think will develop into one of the better pass rushers from this class. Obviously the sack number last year was concerning, but even if he doesn't develop into a double-digit sack guy, in his career, he's going to be a great run defender, and it's huge for a Robert Saleh defense. Anthony Hill, this late in the second round, is good value. Fernando Carmona, the 5th round, solid value. Nicholas Singleton, so the Titans miss out on Jeremiah Love, but get another freaky athletic running back with Singleton. And then Pat Coogan in the 6th round. He's a guy that could potentially start for the Titans at center. So I like Coogan there in the 6th round. I think that's a steal. Good value there for a guy who's had a lot of snaps at center. So Maybe a little limited athletically, but nonetheless can be a serviceable center there for Tennessee. Couple players that they brought in. Tyron Montgomery, I believe that's the wide receiver from John Carroll. So interesting there, to see a D3 player. Emil Wagner, the tackle from Notre Dame, and then Bishop Fitzgerald, the safety from USC. A couple notable names there that they brought in as undrafted free agents. And then last, but I did not grade them. I have the Titans a C plus. I think they reached in a couple spots, but overall an average draft. I'm actually gonna move that up to a B minus. I think it was average draft. Carnell Tate, I don't hate as a pick there at 4. I thought Sonny Styles would be the selection there, or Arvell Reese, but they go offense and then they grab Keldrick Falk. So I think overall it was an average draft, giving the Titans a B minus. Then Washington, not a lot of picks here, but I think they addressed positions of need and got really good value at all of them. Sonny Styles was my number 1 player in this entire class. They get him at 7. Really like that fit. It's going to be interesting to see how they use those linebackers because they have Frankie Louvu there, and then they gave Leo Chenal a lot of money, and then they draft Sonny Styles at 7. And a lot of teams are not running 3 linebackers, so it'll be interesting to see how the workload is split up amongst those 3 players because you're not shipping off Louvu and you just signed Chenal. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think Styles is great value at 7. Antonio Williams, good value in the 3rd round. I mean, he's a slot wide receiver, a good pairing with Terry McLaurin. I mean, they so desperately needed another receiver. I'm not a huge. I had some other receivers above Williams, so interesting selection there. Joshua Josephs, the edge rusher from Tennessee in the 5th round, is absolute steal. He could have went 2nd round, honestly, and I think a team that needs that 3rd edge rusher. I mean, you gave Adafe all that money, and then you have Chase on coming in from the Patriots. You need that 3rd guy, to be a rotational edge rusher. Joshua Josephs is that guy and can be productive in that role. Katron Allen in the 6th round, steal. I think he could have went a lot earlier than that. And then Matt Golban, another steal. I mean, I had like a 4th, 5th round grade on Golban. I honestly think he could start at center for Washington and fix their center problem. I mean, I am that high on Matt Golban from Michigan State, and they shore up the offensive line. So I'm giving Washington a B plus, although they didn't have a lot of picks. They were able to get good value at a lot of them. So those are my grades for the 2026 draft, and each team's grades. I hope you guys enjoyed. I know this is a longer video. Stay tuned for some future videos. One video we're going to have later this week is a look at the 2027 draft class and a little bit of a mock draft there, and a lot more content on the way. So thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one.